The day I discovered that vivid yellow my front door has a violation notice pinned to it was the morning of the 5th HOA board. Pine Valley Estates members obtained subpoenas from the federal. However, in jetting ahead of myself, let me begin right from the start. When I initially relocated into this ostensibly tranquil suburban encountered Sandra Kellerman in the neighborhood. The president of the HOA would soon find out interfering with a cybersecurity system, the internet connection of the contractor was the dumbest choice she's ever made. My name is Nathan. I work from home with Brooks as a consultant to several government organizations that would rather maintain a low profile. I was 47 when I purchased the house. In particular, I selected Maple Grove Lane for 3 reasons. Initially, it had sufficient room for my home office. Secondly, the backyard was big enough to accommodate my satellite apparatus. Thirdly, the prior owner had already put in a backup concrete pad is ideal. Generator. What I failed to consider was the fascination of Sandra Kellerman with dominating every facet of her neighbors' homes, including their providers of internet services. Sandra was the type of lady that wears pressed Saturday mornings in business suits garage sales. She had a measuring device with her tape in her handbag to see if your lawn exceeded the maximum height of 2.5 as outlined in HOA Section 12 bylaws. My neighbor was once fined $200 by her due to the fact that their garden gnome was facing incorrect way. I'm serious, based on her understanding of the aesthetic standards. All ornamental present figures must face the street. A friendly appearance. For guests, my issues began roughly 3 weeks after I moved in. I had just completed the installation, an essential component of my own satellite uplink for the safe links that my Japun accessory, a pole, supported the dish. Totally undetectable in my backyard street, and applied a neutral paint job. Gray, blending into the sky. However, Sandra somehow learned about it. Perhaps the installation truck caught her eye. Or maybe she saw the hardly perceptible glimpse of her second-story dish window, where she is said to have kept binoculars for observing birds. But everyone was aware that she spied on them, the local area. The initial notification showed up early on a Tuesday. It was printed on letterhead from the HOA, with Sandra's signature was spread out over Thebatom, in ink that is purple. The transgression reference, the community's Section 9 criteria, asserting my satellite disformed and unapproved network. Infrastructure that interfered with the aesthetic homogeneity of the neighborhood. The $50 fine was due in 7 days. I disregarded it, thinking it would disappear after a sensible person reviewed it. My first error was that Nirvana valued the resolve of and too much time spent on her by the HOA presidents and resentment for anyone who dares to question her power. Another notice came the next week. The fine had quadrupled to $100 this time, for persistent non-adherence. The correspondence forth had a fresh infraction for excessive transmission of data during host-specified quiet times, which seemed to existed from 10 to 10 p.m. and 6 in the morning. I didn't know that using the internet has calm times, but Sandra had in some way determined that my satellite's electromagnetic emissions were disrupting the tranquility of the area. He made the professional decision to reply. I wrote a courteous letter outlining that my satellite equipment was safeguarded. According to the Telecommunications Act 1996 that stops HOAs from limiting satellite dishes to less than 1 meter in diameter. I have highlighted copy of the pertinent federal rules and even included several feast decisions for precaution. I believe that will put a stop to it. Sandra's reply was not in writing, but rather an individual. She arrived at my house on Saturday morning. 2 additional board members, standing like bodyguards on either side. She had on a HOA and a navy blazer, something that appeared to be a president. Pinsich as a hall monitor. Her hair was pulled back with such force that it appeared painful, and she gripped a clipboard as though it were a weapon. She told me over the phone, loud enough to be heard by half the street, that my unapproved online behavior posed a threat to local safety. According to her, my satellite was drawing undesired messages from outside entities, and that a number of nearby expressed displeasure with meddling with their enfant monitors. I questioned her about which these spied complaints from neighbors. She stated that information was private. I requested to view the written grievances, but according to her, verbal reports were made. At the most recent HOA meeting, when E requested the minutes of the meeting, she stated they were yet untranscribed. It was evident that she was fabricating everything as she went along. But she told every falsehood with assurance from someone who had never previously faced such a difficulty. After that, the situation rapidly worsened. "Go there," Sandra started, informing the neighbors, thinking I was engaging in some sort of illicit working from my house. She recommended that, if possibly selling and pirating movies, them on the internet. She was at the neighborhood pool, wondered aloud whether my satellite was being employed for eavesdropping. Mrs. Henderson was informed from 2 houses down that she had picked up Russian frequencies close to the boundary of my land, whatever that meant. The female had viewed too many espionage films and appeared to believe she was defending national security by interrogating me regarding me connection to the internet. Next came that she attempted to enter my backyard in the morning without authorization. I was at home during a secure video conference with a client when my security camera sounds went off. My phone's screen showed Sandra Kellerman is trying to ascend my private fence of 6 feet while sporting heels and a pencil skirt. She carried a little Yorkshire dog with her Princess, the terrier, was nestled inside what appeared to be a high-end purse. She produced it, was approximately halfway up before she was lost hold and falling back into Mibush Hydranganger. "You keep a record of everything." I had believed it would be useful in the future, and I was entirely correct. However, Sandra didn't let her failed fence stop her climbing journey. If anything, it strengthened her resolve to locate anything to turn against me. Anything. Her subsequent action was both frantic and extremely foolish. She composed an official communication with Peak Communications, the nearby internet service provider, within special arrangement with our HOA, EntitledPeople, copying it to the Federal Attorney General's Office Commission on Communications, and some think now as the Electromagnetic Bureau Security, which I'm fairly certain doesn't. She asserted that I was running an unapproved intelligence node that threatened the country's bandwidth safety. She called for prompt action to shield the neighborhood from what she characterized as my rogue spy work. You must now comment regarding government contractors as well as their tools. When someone identifies a possible security risk, including satellite communication, and using phrases like as intelligence node and monitoring system, it doesn't only vanish into the abyss of bureaucracy. IDIS marked it is looked into. And in my instance, it ended up on my real supervisor in the Department of Defense. On a Thursday, the call was received afternoon. I knew the number instantly since it came from a safe line in the Pentagon. Colonel, my boss, the voice of James Mitchell, was more amused than worried. I quote him when he says, "Mr. Do you know, Brooks, that someone has reported the satellite you were allowed to use uplink as an adversarial external installation?" I informed him that I was and inquired if he wanted copies of every HOA notice I had been gathering. "That would be useful," he said, and inquired for the complete name of Sandra Kellerman and address. What followed was similar to observing a stunning symphony of justice through bureaucracy. In 48 hours, 2 SUVs in black with government license plates Thindris residents during her monthly book club on Thursday. Afternoons getting together, Mrs. told me about it. The person across the street, Patterson U, could see Sandra's front perfectly. Door. 2 dark-suited agents knocked aggressively but courteously. When Sandra replied while holding a cucumber platter, sandwiches, they displayed their credentials and requested a conversation with her regarding her recent claims that infrastructure for federal communications. Every member of the book group observed the view of the living room as Sandra Waskanen conducted an interview on her front porch. For almost 2 hours, the agents were comprehensive but professional. They inquired regarding her assertions of alien signals. They questioned her knowledge of finding centers of intellect. They were especially curious about her choice to pose as a government-y making letterhead for the official Bureau of Electromagnetics, non-existent security. When they departed, Sandra's face had turned white, then red, and finally in relation to the shade of gray. However, the first step was federal agents. The week after that, I got a call from the FCC itself, who told me they were looking into Sandra's filing, misleading information, and interfering with authorized telecommunication apparatus. The Office of the State Attorney General sent your own correspondence, alerting her to the consequences for intentionally making false accusations made to police enforcement. A cease and desist was sent by Peak Communications. Desist letter requesting the Shisisoding that they are representing their business in oniability. I determined it was time to adopt a more proactive strategy, arranged a community internet safety seminar, and invited each and every Pine Valley Estates home. I succeeded, evident that the presentation would include imbecile visitors from the Department of Homeland Security, which would include subjects such as determining true security dangers against hypothetical ones, the legal safeguards for satellite, as well as the federal sanctions for tampering with equipment used by government contractors. 47 people arrived, which was impressive, given that there were only 60 homes in our HOA. Those who have never been to a prior to this, community events were abruptly extremely concerned about internet safety. I had finished preparing a presentation, includes authentic DOD logos and citations to federal statutes. My coworker from Agent Rivera of Homeland Security spoke about actual cyberspace in an interesting way. Risks and the ways in which they vary from, end quote, Russian paranoid delusion, stealing, and frequencies. Though the highlight came when Agent River outlined how anyone who is aware AF disrupts a government communications equipment owned by the contractor may spend up to 10 years in federal incarceration and recovers up to $250,000. A pin drop may have been heard in that space. Numerous individuals turned to gaze. At Sandra's chair was unoccupied. She was the sole Simeon who hadn't been there, saying she experienced an unexpected migraine. The monthly HOA DOSTA following date was set for the meeting, Tuesday. I got there early with the documents and a flash drive in a briefcase at RIF. With my presentation on it, the community center was full. Individuals who had been absent from a HOA meeting for years, abruptly determined that they must be engaged in local government. Sandra sat looking at the board table. She was tiny than I had ever seen. Hertha, typical dramatic blazer, had been swapped out wearing an unassuming cardigan, and Hertha was no clipboard visible. When the time for a new venture arrived, I raised my hand and was acknowledged as a speaker. I got up and plugged my laptop into a projector, and I started my slide about my 40S presentation with the subject. How to prevent unintentionally committing federal offenses due to your anger over some winsome line. A few laughs from the crowd, but Sandra didn't change her expression. The third slide was a screen grab of the 1996's Telecommunications Act with the yellow highlights. Indicate pertinent portions. Slide 7 displayed the official fixed stance on HOA limitations off satellite apparatus. Slide 12 was my personal favorite. The picture was still. From my security camera, which displays Sandra along my fence, halfway up, Princess Thea glimpse of the Yorkshire Terrier outside her purse. Laughter broke out throughout the room. In the rear, someone yelled, that. The audio on slide 19 came from a phone call that was recorded in which Sandra State High Customer Service and Communications Trianter of my satellite and beaming communism directly, as I put it, into our community. I had Aqueduct's audio. Recording lawfully using a Freedom of Information requests following peak harassment was reported by Communications. To the local government. The client, the support representative, could be heard attempting to chuckle as Sandra maintained that electromagnetic waves have the potential to political beliefs. By slide 35, which described the particular federal law in full, Sandra might have transgressed the only sound in the room, waste projectors buzz. I described how her behavior might be interpreted as intimidation against a federal contractor, interference with the government correspondent, submitting fictitious reports to federal organizations, and posing as a representative of the government. The possibility outlined some sobering penalties. We were discussing important federal fees in addition to HOA fines. After completing my presentation, I created a basic movement. I shift the board. Vote on Sandra Kellerman's eligibility to keep up your role as HOA president given her possible criminal responsibility, as well as the harm she had done to our reputation. The motion was seconded instantly by 3 distinct individuals. The board members exchanged glances anxiously. They were aware that they needed to call for a vote. The charter of the community necessary for any vote of no confidence, toined the president. be determined by a straightforward ask of the members present. The voting papers were distributed by the secretary. Voters wrote and folded their ballots. Cautiously, Sandra remained still at the board table, a mask covering her face in credulity. Following the vote count, everyone agreed. All 47 people in attendance, her removal had been approved by the members. Not even the other board, just 1% participants who had helped her Entitleded in favor of her staying. Sandra got up, gently getting up, collecting her belongings with trembling hands. As she approached the get out, there's a toddler. In the rear row, roared as loudly as the sun. The nasty woman is in major issue. Nervousness arose throughout the room, giggling. Sandra stopped at the entrance, faced the room once more, and uttered in a voice that was hardly audible above a whisper, "You didn't comprehend your actions. These standards are needed in the neighborhood. It must someone who is interested in real estate, value sand, keeping the peace." I got up and calmly responded, "What this community requires is a person who comprehends the distinction between upholding norms and engaging in federal offenses." Sandra's face turned purple. She parted her lips to answer, but nothing came out. She turned and left, allowing the door to open, slam behind her. She was never seen by us at an additional HOA meeting. After 3 weeks, I heard through the grapevine in the area, Sandra was employed on a part-time basis at customer service at Peak Communications Store. It was deliciously ironic. The woman who attempted to use an ISP as a weapon opposed to me was now taking calls for them, recording her calls for assurance of quality. Numerous neighbors claimed to have called in merely to listen to her professional voice on the other end, welcoming clients on behalf of the business. Shahad attempted impersonation before. The 6-month federal probe was completed later. Sandra wasn't guilty of any crimes. However charged, she did obtain a formal FCC notice and received a fine $15,000 for submitting fraudulent reports and disrupting communications that are When the official letter reached her home, brought by a postal worker who needed someone to sign, Mrs. Patterson claimed to be able to hear Sandra's cry from the other side of the